Hello, everyone, and welcome to Press Coverage, Season 2 finale, Episode 28 overall. So first off, thank you everyone who's supported me through, well, so far 27 episodes, and again, hopefully tonight, Episode 28. Like I mentioned, there'll be the Season 2 finale, so off-season number 2 complete here on Press Coverage, and a special guest from the Going for Two family here tonight to join me is Dr. James Ferretti. How you doing, Doc?
I'm doing well, Kyle. It is, I have to tell you, it's an honor to be here and to be on the show and to do the season 2 finale. Don't tell anybody else, but this is one of my favorite shows on the Going for Two network. And I really love, the way you do your interviews and people come on that maybe I know of, but really get to know more about them and so their backstory, kind of what interested them in fantasy sports and lots of other like fun stuff. So it really is an honor to be here and be able to kind of share some of that. So thanks for having me.
Well, Doc, just a bit of a spoiler here. If you want to say a secret, this is a live broadcast, so people can hear you. So if you say something they don't want others to hear, unfortunately, they might hear it. So if their viewers are watching on YouTube, for instance, or Twitch, or Facebook, or any of the Going for Two live pages, they can also interact with us in the comments. Now, we don't get Facebook names, to be fair, so if you do want to have your name seen on the screen, you can come to the YouTube page for sure. But someone on Facebook is mentioning, "What up, good people?"
All right.
Gator J
Gator
is in the
J is
house, and he
here.
says Doc is in the house, so
Hey,
Doc is in
Gator. Thanks
officially.
for tuning in, man.
But yes, if you want to interact with us again, go to the Going for Two live YouTube page, and yeah, you can have your questions, comments seen on screen, your name as well, and fun times here. And fortunately, Twitter can't see your comments at all. So that's something if you do want to interact again, we suggest going to the YouTube page. And of course, always check out goingfor2.com. Great source for all your fantasy sports needs, whether it's football, basketball. CFL is football, but it is a different version of football. So there's that too. So DFS, redraft, dynasty, everything covered on goingfor2.com, and including a couple of Doc's articles. Actually, Doc, we could start there. I actually haven't got to part 2 yet, but part 1 of the how to find running back value series. And I don't think I've ever seen someone so eloquently describe football and demolition derbies and put it all together so beautifully. So I definitely recommend people go check that out for sure.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Now, see, here's the thing. Now, we do a show together on Monday nights, and I know and anybody that watches this show knows that you're a self-proclaimed big running back guy. So, what were your thoughts as far as the impact of like what the idea was and the concept and, basically, what did you think about the idea of kind of shifting some capital away or some acquisition away from early running backs and kind of the thought process behind that? I was really interested to hear your take on it.
Well, I think in a sense, you kind of break it all down. You're trying to buy points. You're trying to buy fantasy points and production, and that doesn't necessarily all have to come in the first round either. And the players with the more opportunities are more likely going to score more points, but you also don't have to necessarily look at season long opportunities as everything that you're going to get. It's still a weekly game, so the weekly opportunities, which those can fluctuate, and players lower down can get tons of weekly opportunities under the right circumstances. Kind of the idea behind it of understanding you're just buying points, so how are you going to distribute the funds you have to buy the points in an auction that's literal funds in dollars and cents, but even in a snake draft, that's still draft capital you're spending, and how you choose to spend those that capital on points, and obviously we have different positions, so where are you going to go each position. So I felt you did a lot of those principles and processes, and you make a lot of good points. Again, as someone who's robust RB, I'm always a little hesitant, especially early in a draft, but there's definitely I'm in a certain league, I might reach for Jamar Chase if the opportunity comes up early in a draft, if the settings kind of call for it. So
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. If we can get Kyle to move off of his robust RB strategies just a little bit, move the needle, then I think there's something there for everybody. So thank you for the feedback.
Well, I mean, this is going to almost be a natural place to plug some more stuff, but Jamie's mentioning loving the Going for Two gear, needs some of that in my life. And so I will say this to Jamie specifically, so this doesn't feel like it's an ad, and this is just me pointing out something obvious, even though it's basically going to be an ad for Viridian Global. But ViridianGlobal.com has all sorts of great gear for not just going for two, but all sorts of great fantasy football. And like even like Jamie, you were watching that touchdown chart I kept showing on the Dynasty Gambit. That's from Viridian Global as well. So they've got some like football specific stuff that's just, general fantasy or general football stuff. But of course, yeah, going for two collection. They've got T-shirts, hats. I know I'm doing just the double logo here, but they got the no kickers as well, to rock that stuff at times. I know Jeff loves the no kickers hat on the armchair. That's a staple for him. So yeah, all that gear is again at viridianglobal.com. So yeah, apparently Jay agrees with Jamie on getting the gear. So yeah, everyone should get that too. And we'll get to the topics at hand. I mean, rambling for 5 minutes, but that's, I guess, again, if anyone who's watched the Monday Night Show with Doc and I and our other co-hosts, that there tends to be a lot of rambling and ranting anyway. So no surprise it started that way here.
Part of the fun.
But yeah, so as mentioned, start off at the beginning and your love of sports. And where did that all begin? Where did that all start?
Wow, it was interesting to think about. I was kind of late getting into sports. Like I didn't play Little League baseball. I didn't really play a lot of organized sports when I was growing up. And I think it was 1988. So I was about 12 years old. And my dad took me, my brother, and my sister to Yankee Stadium for the first time. And I just remember and this is the old Yankee Stadium. So if you've never been there, it's kind of like the infrastructure is just a lot of concrete. And I just remember kind of being like in the bowels of Yankee Stadium, walking up to where our seats are, walking up this concrete ramp. And then I saw the field and it was like this beautiful green field. And I remember like seeing that and like hearing the crowd and the sound of the bat cracking, like, on a hit. And I remember the food, like the ballpark food, like just getting a hot dog and a soda and ice cream. And it was like that day, for whatever reason, I was like a billy goat. Like everything that came across, it was like cotton candy, nachos, which was nachos not like they are now. It was like the nachos that were preserved from like 1968 with the nuclear nacho cheese sauce. So the stale chips with the nacho cheese, which would probably last for 50 more years.
Are they, and you're a doctor, so you'll know this, are they actually allowed to serve those types of
I think
food anymore?
I think it's actually banned in some. No, I don't know. But and the thing is, if I go to a bowl game and it's there, it's like there's still a pull for me to get it, even though I know it's probably not the best thing for you. So I still have this pull. Like every time I go to a bowl game, especially a baseball game, I turn back into a billy goat and I just want to eat everything.
And this is a doctor, not necessarily advice, but a doctor's impression.
Do not take any. Please consult with a medical professional before changing your diet or do anything like that. This is not medical advice. This is just for fun.
Yeah, and I mean the fun of sports, watching these athletes compete at the highest level is great. But what made you want to participate yourself and make the jump to fantasy sports? And you get to make the decisions.
Yeah. My first experience with fantasy sports was actually when I was a freshman in high school, and a friend of mine was in a fantasy football draft, and I wasn't even in the league. I just was kind of like hanging out, and like the draft was like 7 a.m. before class started. And it's like, and the people that know me know that I don't do like work and get up early and stuff like that. I hated it. And now I work nights. Like that's like, I'm a true night owl. So for me to like get up and do this thing, like that was something. And just being there and kind of seeing the strategy of like what players are you going to pick, what players to go after, just the very infancy of like player evaluation. Like, why would you take this guy over this guy? And we're talking about like a league where the first round pick, they were trying to decide between like Joe Montana versus Jerry Rice. Like that's how old this league was. And the idea of sleepers, like that was my first like foray into the world of like getting a guy that other people literally had never heard of, who ends up being good. Not like a guy who's like, maybe I've heard of him and he's going to outproduce his draft position. It was like you would draft somebody, or they would draft somebody and everybody else would literally go, who? And it was amazing. So that was my first, kind of experience with it. And it just stuck with me. And I didn't actually get into fantasy sports until college, where I had the opportunity to kind of join my first leagues. And then I was hooked after that. I mean, it was it was great. And I was terrible when I first started. I'm a lot better now than I was then, but my first forays into fantasy, I was brutal. But I was able to turn it around really quickly and never look back.
It's funny because the robust RB guy in me is like deciding between Montana and Rice first. Like, just get the running back.
Yeah.
Get Roger Craig, or I guess, or Ricky Waters, whoever's the 49ers back. It's
yeah. Well, it would have been Roger Craig, which shows you how long ago it was. My friend was a big 49ers fan, so he was like, he wanted like, and Joe Montana and Jerry Rice were ridiculous. So it was.
I mean, to be fair, that's like, sometimes like, I'll always draft Packers players, like, somewhere in the draft. You just try and get a Packers player, and it's try and just get good offenses, right? Like invest in good offenses. So it's like that's the one where you can be a homer pick, and yeah, you can take players from this team just because they're going to score points.
Right. Exactly.
And then so I guess my next question was going to relate to your book, which as always we show it on screen every time. Injuries suck, but your fantasy team doesn't have to. This book definitely doesn't suck either, and it'll help your fantasy teams maybe not suck as well. Although I think anyone who's doing the research, going through it, and looking for resources anyway, probably not going to have a team that sucks. But the injuries do play an unfortunate part, and this helps you be prepared. Helps you not just understanding injuries, but also some draft strategies to players who are injured going into a season, recovering from injuries. How do you take that into account? A lot of good game theory principles, and it's actually a pretty light read, like 100 pages, and it's jam-packed of information. So definitely check out the book. Now, Dr. James Ferretti, so you're obviously a medical doctor. So I guess, your inspiration to start the book, we could go through 7 years of medical school history, but
yeah,
obviously that exists. So if there's anything you want to talk about from your experience, your decision to want to become a doctor and all that, you can, and then eventually kind of work your way to your inspiration to create this book.
Wow. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I can be brief as far as the doctor part. Ridiculously brief. So I'm a doctor of radiology. And I think one of the things that appealed to me about radiology, and still does, is the idea of you're looking at images of the human body and you're trying to put together a puzzle. Like the patient is there, something's wrong. And can you look at these pictures? Can you look inside the body and figure out what's going on, with the addition of, the history of why they're there, lab work, physical exam findings, all the other stuff. It's just all this information that we put together, and we try to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And there's a lot of parallels that I realized over time with fantasy sports.
I was just thinking that as you said it. So yeah, clearly.
That's what we do. We take in all this information, especially now, it's like talking about like the first, forays into fantasy back in like the early 90s for me, where it was literally like you get a magazine that was printed 3 months ago and that was your resource. Now we have the internet and we have infinite resources, and trying to kind of tease out that information, make it make sense, and put it in a way that you can understand it and make something useful out of it, and hopefully use it to your advantage to win at fantasy sports. So those are the parallels between medicine and kind of why I got into medicine and what I love about radiology. As far as the book kind of started, I didn't really have a plan for writing a book. What ended up happening was, this is a couple of years before the pandemic. I was fortunate enough to be invited to speak on an injury panel by my good friends and the great folks over at Baseball HQ, which is a great fantasy baseball website. And I've done some work for them, and they're tremendous. But they have a conference, which is not too dissimilar to the Fantasy Football Expo, which is, now becoming really popular. And I was on the injury panel out there. So I flew out to Arizona. I spoke on the injury panel, and it's maybe like 25 or 30 people in the room. But the thing that got me is how engaged everybody was. Like the questions they asked, like their thirst for knowledge, like looking for that edge of what can I do to get better at this game that I love. And I kept having the same conversations over and over again after that, which was really cool. It's like, I kind of felt like a celebrity. They were like, "Hey doc, I got a question." They pull me to the side. "Hey doc, I got a question for you. Let me buy you a beer and ask you about this guy or that guy or whatever." And the same thing that kept coming up was, people would tell me I can evaluate player talent. I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, I can evaluate talent. I can work the waiver wire, but I keep getting undone by injuries. Like, I wish there was something that I could do about that. And on the flight home, that's when kind of inspiration kicked in. And even though I've written things before, like, I'm a big believer of the idea of, like, I have a muse, right? And sometimes the muse speaks and the creative juices start flowing. And then it's like, okay, like, it's time to pay attention to this. And then sometimes nothing. So anybody that like puts out content that they do it like every week or twice a week or 3 times a week, like, they have my undying respect, because it is really challenging. And my muse does not speak that often, but I got on the flight to go home and I was just energized about these things and I was thinking about them, and the muse was speaking, and I started writing, and I just pulled out my iPad and I started typing, and I typed for the whole flight. And it was like a 5-hour flight the whole way home. And that is what ended up being the first few chapters of what ultimately became the book, like 2 or 3 years later. So that's how it all started.
Oh, good old, conventions and stuff, and maybe not the most conventional way to come inspired by a book, but yeah, how we gain inspiration. The muse makes the rules almost. And it's funny because Jamie's mentioned I'm just the host. I don't make the rules on this show, and that's true. This is all about the guests, and the guests will kind of dictate where we go from there, or the viewers and their questions. So, Jay asking Doc, which school did you go to?
So for undergrad, I went to Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. And for medical school, I went to the Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine, which is in Erie, Pennsylvania, kind of the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, about 2 hours north of Pittsburgh. So shout out to all the Yinzers out there. I went to school with a lot of folks from Pennsylvania, a lot of people from the Pittsburgh area, Pittsburgh, Monroeville, and went to a lot of Pirates games while I was out there. Didn't get to see the Steelers, unfortunately, but I had more than a few Permante's sandwiches, and I really, really enjoyed the time out there. The only thing I can tell you about Erie, if you don't already know, is it snows a lot out there, which I thought was, you're Canadian, so you get it. I had no idea. Like, coming from New Jersey, like, if it snows like 2 or 3 inches, like, they're ready to declare like a state of emergency. It's like, everybody stay home, stock up on bread and milk, which that's a whole separate conversation that I still don't get. But there's a run on the supermarkets if 2 inches of snow is happening. Like, in Erie, like, there were times where I like went in to see a movie, came out, and there was like 8 inches of snow on the ground, and it's a blizzard, and you got to get home. And it's just like, yeah, it's snowing a little bit. Like, you got to figure it out. Like, there's no like snow days. There's no like, you're not going to school the next day, or you're not going to your rotation. Like, you got to figure it out. So that was my kind of crash course. Luckily, not literally a crash course, but that was my my introduction into what it's like to really be in like a frozen tundra.
Yeah, because you don't want to get into a car accident like football players do every game, right? And that type of
Right.
force compounded. That I know you make those like comparisons often on the Monday night show. But speaking of the Monday night pregame show, which I guess it'll be in what are we 2 weeks away from the season?
Yeah, it's coming up.
3. I think the first Monday night football game is September 12th, so 3 weeks away from today, and that'll be the first episode of the Monday night pregame show, the 2-point conversion pregame show. So with Doc, myself, as well as Gladys and Dan, and we started that 2 years ago. And Doc, I guess 2 years ago you did join the stream. So what was it like to kind of join us as co-hosts, but just kind of this whole experience getting into live streaming now that you had the book writing experience?
Yeah. I was really nervous. And I still kind of get nervous every time, like right beforehand. I was definitely excited, but I was nervous. It's like there's a vulnerability attached to it. It's like you're putting yourself out there, and it's live. So there was that too. It's like, what if I say something ridiculous, or if I say this guy's gonna play and he doesn't? And it was, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was when I joined the stream. It was right around the time when Drew Brees got hurt, and then he ended up breaking a bunch of ribs. And at first it was like, oh, he's fine. And then he's like, he may have cracked one rib. And then it's like, oh, he cracked a bunch of ribs and he collapsed his lung. And I was like, what's next? Like, it's getting worse by the hour. So it's like that was the first kind of process, big injury that we talked about. But honestly, like you, Gladys, Dan were so welcoming, and it was really easy for me to settle in quickly and get into the flow. And pretty soon I forgot I was even being recorded, so I just was able to kind of let all that go. And like once you're in flow, like you're just there, you're talking and you're doing your thing, and it was great. It is such a great experience, and I'm really looking forward to this. Is year 3, and we're still chugging along, and it's something that I look forward to every week. There's definitely a lot of work that goes into it, and want to provide the best information we can to the audience and the Going for Two family. We have some new things with the Discord, which has been super popular, the injury channel on the Discord, which I'm really looking forward to interacting with more people on, and really being able to get the content out to more people. But it was definitely nerve wracking, but now it's more exciting than it is nerve wracking.
And you know what? You become a true professional because you transition perfectly. We should talk about the Going for Two Discord, which is
We
constantly
should.
growing. I know it was booming during the Scott Fishbowl draft,
Yes.
and a lot of people joined for that. But I think it's gonna, Jeff's got a lot of play with all that, and it keeps going through the season. So definitely encourage people to check the Going for Two Discord, one of the bigger face football discords out there. So a lot of great stuff, and you can get some really personalized individual channels, docs injuries. I know Thomas, who's been contributing to us recently, he's doing some things. I know Foss as well. So yeah, check all
There's
that.
DFS stuff.
Yep,
There's
exactly.
betting. There's a betting Yeti, Jared Good. There's a
Right.
betting
Yeah.
channel. Jared, $15,000 winner at DFS. No big deal. He's got his own channel. There's a lot of really great stuff out there for kind of whatever you're into. And even if you just want to talk about movies or Star Wars or, television and music, like there's other stuff in there that's just kind of community based, which I really think is great too. Like it's not just about like providing information, which, there's that, but it really does feel like a community in there. And I think we're over 700 subscribers at this point. And by the time the season starts, it's like we're shooting for 1,000, and we're trying to go from there. So it's really
we're going for 2,000.
Yeah, then we'll go for 2,000 and more. But it's really grown, and it's really been great to have that engagement and to kind of have that community.
A lot of good, like just fantasy football conversations, just general, just
Yeah.
like talking about whatever and again, the interactions are so key to our live shows as well as the Discord. So credit to everyone who's subscribing and watching and viewing and listening. Just really appreciate all that support. Now, I guess the next question I have for you is who are your biggest influences? And I didn't really leave anything else other than that. And this could be talk about book, talk about live streaming, just in general as a human being. So I kind of let it open to your interpretation. So Doc,
Wow.
Who are your biggest influences?
I have a lot. So I kind of approached it in the way of thinking about like who are my influences as far as like content creation and like fantasy sports and injuries and things like that. And that was, something that I thought was really cool. So, first and foremost is with regard to fantasy injuries is Stefania Bell from ESPN. I mean, she's the GOAT. She's the original, and I've been following her content for a really long time, even before I was a doctor, and was just always impressed by, the idea of like before I was a doctor and before I kind of knew this stuff myself, like I used to get tricked and fooled and misled by, media reports all the time where they'd say this guy was going to be fine. And then the next thing you know, he's out for a month or 2 months, or he's out for the year. And it's like, I throw my hands up in frustration, just like lots of other people. And her way of kind of breaking things down and explaining them and kind of being able to teach you like how to predict some of these things and how to understand the process behind it, was really informative, but it also kind of changed my way of thinking. And I was able to use that going forward. So she's been a huge influence. Another one is Gene Bramall from footballguys.com. He was really one of the first ones who put out an injury column, and he's actually a pediatrician by trade. And he's I know he does some sports medicine stuff as well, but just kind of seeing him do it and his style and how he makes things approachable was one of the first guys, to do it on like a paid site that I was aware of. And I just really appreciated his ability to do that. And then more recently, Edwin Porras, FB Injury Doc, and Jesse Morris from the Fantasy Doctors. Edwin Porras is a physical therapist, doctor of physical therapy, and Jesse Morris is a sports medicine doctor. So really appreciate their approach of again, trying to educate and be prescriptive. And then the last guy that I'll mention is David Chow, the orthopedic surgeon, who if anybody knows anybody in the industry as far as injuries, he's probably one of the most famous. And he was a former team doctor, and he just is really, really good at what he does. So they definitely influenced me. The thing about me is that I do things a little bit differently because I'm a radiologist. So I appreciate the influence and the idea of like looking at film and studying the rehab process and how they repair these things and stuff like that. But as a radiologist, my job is diagnosis. And the one thing that you'll hear a lot of these people say is like, they'll look at the film and they'll put their content out and they'll say, imaging will tell the tale. Like, we think it could be this, but the imaging will tell us what it is. The MRI will tell us what it is, or the CAT scan will tell us what it is. Well, I'm the guy that reads the CAT scans and MRIs, or somebody like me is the one that's reading them for the players. So having that knowledge, I'm able to kind of say, okay, like if they're saying that this is a grade 2 sprain of the MCL, what's that actually mean? What's that look like? What's the most likely scenario? What else could be injured? And kind of take it from there. And then for the audience, like, is what's being reported reasonable? Like, if somebody's got a grade 2 MCL sprain and they're saying, the coach is saying, probably be back in 2 weeks. It's like, it's probably not the way it's going to work out. So what can I do to help people kind of be more informed about that, make better decisions, and kind of read between the lines and be able to kind of tease out what's more likely to happen for them so they can make better fantasy football decisions or fantasy sports decisions and be guided a little bit more, as opposed to just kind of crossing your fingers and hoping and, potentially getting the rug pulled out from under you, which I'm sure we've all experienced, even myself. I don't know. How about you? What do you think?
Well, and the one thing in terms of what I think is just kind of what you're saying at the end, analytics, I think a lot of what analytics tries to do is predict what is most likely to happen. And it seems like that's kind of what you try and do with these injuries. Okay, if this is what the injury actually is, and without you actually reading the MRI or CAT scan yourself, you won't know for sure. But if based on the information we have, what's being reported, what we know, what is the most likely outcome for this? And it's almost a very analytical way of trying to look at it. And just like in analytics, there's always outliers. There's going to be players that take longer to recover, take shorter time to recover. So, but having the baseline averages is kind of what we always strive for in analytics anyway. So I think that's what makes, I find your injury advice in particular, really, I find it very informative and very actionable.
Oh yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And it's the idea of like the injury happens and then there's the, like, what do we do? Do we have to drop the guy now because he's going to be out for a really long time? Can we wait? How long can we wait? There's a lot of context, but then it's the recovery process. It's like, what's happening? How are things looking? Is he advancing the way that we hope, or do we now have to reevaluate? So more information is always coming in. So there's that initial kind of diagnosis, and then there's along the way. So it's not cookie cutter. It's like you said, everybody's different. There's a lot of variables in play. And I think one of the things for me is I really want to make an impact. Like, I want to, the proverb, I'm sure you've heard it. Give a person a fish, feed him for a day, teach a person to fish, feed him for a lifetime. Like, I look at injuries like that. Like, if somebody gets hurt, like, yeah, I can tell you like what's going to happen, like in this case with a reasonable degree of certainty, but I really want to teach, my audience or the people that consume my content, the process behind it. So it's, tell a person about an injury, help them for a day, teach them about injuries, help them for a lifetime. Like, I really want to help people understand the process behind it and then be able to use that information going forward indefinitely. Like, I love the stories of, like, I've been doing this where I hear from people and they're like, oh, you mentioned something about, high ankle sprains, and I heard it like 3 years ago. And then that injury happened again with my guy, and I knew to get rid of him and pick somebody else up, and I won my league because of that. And I'm like, yes, like, that's fantastic. Like it wasn't like in that proximal time period. It was years later down the road, and it made an impact, and it helped them, do something, win a game, win a title. I mean, that's what I'm all about. Like making that kind of impact to me, that's amazing. That's what I really get excited about.
And I mean, whether you're writing, podcasting, live streaming, you're trying to help the audience. And frankly, you're not only helping the audience, you're helping the co-host too. Because I feel like Gladys, Dan, and myself, and I think they would both agree that we've gotten better at the injury analysis just because of you. I think I noticed there's a couple times where one of us breaks something up and we'd almost have the answer for you and be like, yes, exactly. You guys are listening. Perfect.
Yeah. that's always a good feeling. It's like when you guys, like, you pick up on it so quick and you're like, so I'm thinking this, and I'm like, you're exactly right.
Like one was like, oh, they didn't mention it. They didn't mention it was a low ankle sprain, and they just kind of left it ambiguous. So we guessed high ankle sprain, and it turned out to be that. Like if it was low ankle sprain, they would have for sure given the good news and given it right away, but they didn't. So it made us like, oh, is that? And that's all stuff that like gleaned from like how you kind of view what's being said, and not just taking it at face value. Okay, if they're saying this, what does that actually mean?
Yes, I love it.
But I guess, yeah. So, if anyone is writing or podcasting or live stream, what's one piece of advice that you would give to someone who is looking to start out?
Wow. That's a really good question. Cause I had to think about, like, am I in a position to like give advice to people? I guess so. All right. I would say I have two things. So I get to make the rules, right? Like it's Gator J says I get to make the rules. So I get to make the rules. There you go. The first thing is that if you're going to do a podcast, like, you have to get some kind of microphone so you sound decent. It doesn't have to be super expensive, but don't use the computer microphone. And I learned this through experience, because if you go back to some of our early podcasts, like, I didn't have a real microphone. I was using the computer mic, and it's like there are times where it's like you have to shout over the other person, or it just doesn't sound good, and it can be really distracting. So that's number one. It's like if you're gonna do this and you're gonna put your thoughts out there, at least have your voice sound good. Whatever your voice is, you just at least want the sound quality to be decent. And then the other thing is, probably this much more important, is just remember that you have an audience. So you want to do something to support them for watching, listening, consuming your content, and however you put it out there. Like, you want to give them something. You want to give them something unique, teach them something, give them something actionable, entertain them, hopefully all the above. But you want to reward them for being there. It's like, we don't do this for ourselves. Like, we understand the concept of, like, there are people that are watching this, that are going to be tuning in, that are reading what we write, and watching us and listening to us, and hopefully buying our books. And you want to give them something for that. You want to reward them for taking the time out of their busy schedules, and where they could be doing literally infinitely other things, but they're taking time out of their day to consume content. Reward them for that. Remember that you have an audience, and reward them for being your audience.
So thank you, audience. Also, thanks for that doc. But yeah, thanks, audience, for watching and things like that. But as we get to a little bit outside of football, actually, I don't know. I don't know how you're going to answer this, but
Okay.
Knowing that we've talked so much about sports, fantasy sports, Doc, what are some of your favorite hobbies?
Okay. So this is a good one. As I had to think about it, it's like, what are some of my hobbies? So one of my hobbies, which, it's kind of delving into something that maybe a lot of people don't know, is that I've been involved in martial arts and boxing for about 12 or 13 years. And it's something that I really enjoy. And I've gotten to the point now where I'm actually able to teach children and adults, which is very rewarding in its own right. So something that I love. It's definitely physically taxing. It's definitely scary when somebody that's a lot bigger and stronger than you is trying to choke you or pull your arm off, or beat you up, punch you in the face. It definitely definitely can reorient you and keep you present, focused. But it's something that I truly enjoy. It's been life-changing for me, and I'm really grateful for it. Something else that I enjoy, kind of on the other end of the spectrum, is I just love sitting out in the sun with a good book or listening to a podcast and just relaxing and kind of feeling.
Here's a good book.
Yeah. Thank you. And it could be any book. It could be that book. It could be any other book. Just being able to kind of connect with, the warmth of the sun, sometimes a nice cool beverage, whatever your beverage of choice might be, and just being able to settle down and relax. Hey, look at that. Jamie's been doing martial arts for 35 years. That's pretty impressive. I got a long way to go before I get there. And I don't know if my joints are going to hold out for another 20 years, but we'll see. Fingers crossed. Something else that I got into recently is during the pandemic, it was like impossible to do a bunch of stuff. But one of the things, especially around this area, was get a bike. Like bikes were like impossible to find. And it's like all the stores were sold out. You just couldn't get one. So recently I bought a bike and I started riding around my neighborhood at night when it's super quiet and it's just me. And I haven't owned a bike for like 20 something years, maybe longer. And just kind of getting back in touch with like being a kid and how much I used to ride bikes all the time when I was a kid. That was how I got around the town that I grew up in before I could drive, which is only 3 miles wide or 3 miles long, 1 mile wide. And that was how I got around and I loved it. And just kind of getting back in touch with that, I was like, man, this is amazing. Like it was so relaxing. I would just like put on some music or put on a podcast and just put on a couple of reflective wristbands so I don't get hit by a car and just ride, and just amazing. And then I would say the last thing is about 6 months ago, I got married, and I really just enjoy spending time with my wife and playing like board games. Like we play Battleship. We have some epic like Battleship and Connect 4 battles. We watching TV and just kind of just being in the same space together and talking, go for walks and now she got a bike, so we're going to go for bike rides. And one thing that she is really great at is playing catch. So I used to love to play catch when I was a kid, and one of the things we've done the last few weeks is we've like gone to the park with a glove and a softball and just had a good old fashioned catch. And I think in the fall we're going to transition to football. And it's just been tremendous. So she's a lot of fun. She really, like, her laugh is infectious and her energy, she's so positive, and it really just kind of reminds me to be present focused and be a kid. It's okay to be a kid even if you're an adult, and she really brings that out of me and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, is going to transition to hockey in the winter as well.
I don't know about that, but one thing that I can tell you is, as a Canadian, you'll appreciate this. I have played in a street hockey league, which I was terrible, but I scored 3 goals. So I was like second on my team in goals. We were not very good. And I have won a fantasy hockey league. And the reason that I was able to win was, this is back in college. So I used to play on Sega Genesis, NHL 94. And all the players that were good on that game, I drafted them to my fantasy team and I eradicated everybody. And they were like, "How, you don't even know anything about hockey. How are you good at this?" And I was like, NHL 94, man.
Play the Chow, folks. That's where the answer's at. But Jay's mentioning this. Congrats, Doc, on the wedding. And I echo those statements. It's the official. We'll put out an official press coverage, press release congratulating our guests on the wedding.
Thank you.
Even though you came on 6 months after the wedding. But no, that's great. Now, the next question is, or was going to be, what's one thing that very few people know about you? You've kind of revealed 3. So if there's nothing else, we can move on to the next one.
I have something that we haven't mentioned that I think a lot of people don't know. Maybe some people do. I'm actually pretty good at doing impressions, and like voice impressions. And the thing is that most of the ones I do are people that I know. Like if I know you and I spend a decent amount of time with you and there's anything about your voice that's like unique or that I can mimic, I'm probably unconsciously working on an impression of you. And then sometimes, again, the muse, like it just comes out. And it's like, oh, I can do an impression of this person pretty good. And I do some of like famous people and artists and singers and stuff like that. Not good enough to ever do it as like there are people that do this, comedians and professionals, like they're amazing. Like I'm nowhere near that level, but pretty decent at doing impressions, and it's just one of my kind of like unsung talents.
So apparently Sega wants their cut of your winnings for that fantasy league. Does Sega even exist anymore?
I don't know, but it was $70. So if they get in touch with me, I'll cut them a check for 10%. And I'll cut them a check for $7. But then again, like considering the amount of money that I spent on Sega Genesis games back then, I feel like they definitely got their pound of flesh from me and then some. Like I spent a lot of time playing Sega Genesis
Which, I mean,
back in the day.
to
So
be fair, if you bought the game for like the advice, like I mean, if you buy a fantasy football magazine, you get a subscription to a website, and then you win a league. We're not going to act like if Going for Two ever had any paid subscription and you won, we're not going to ask for the winnings of the league. Like we got the personal league podcast, so we provide everyone pitches in the league and pay for it, and then do the podcast. Which Doc, you've done a couple of those as well. It's super fun. We don't go to the okay, you won the league, you got to give us a part of your cut. Like we don't do
right.
That's not really how like fantasy advice would work anyway. So Sega doesn't really have a leg to stand on for that if they ever did come after you. And you got to keep the Canadian content to a certain level, apparently, because Jamie's asking if you can do a Jim Carrey impersonation.
Do a Jim Carrey. Wow. That's like Jim Carrey isn't even Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey's like everybody else, right? I mean, he's amazing. So I wouldn't say that I have a specific Jim Carrey impression, but I think I can do one pretty good. Kyle, you may recognize this guy. So, like, let's say you were thinking about maybe a tight end sleeper for this year. I don't know, maybe Evan Ingram. No, I'm just kidding. He's total bollocks. Forget that guy. How'd I do?
See, I'm not that smart. I mean, one could call me stupid or stupider or dumb, and I don't know. I thought you did.
So, you think the B League would approve of my impression?
I'm not sure he'd approve of anything, Doc. So
that is fair.
I can't.
That is very
speak
fair.
for him.
So, B League, if you're watching, I apologize in advance, but just know that whenever you talk, I'm continuing to refine my impression of you, and someday I will perfect it. B League, of course, our amazing host, Dan the B League Rosia on the Monday Night Show.
And I think you had to specify because you said Evan Ingram was not on the Giants anymore. So I think it was you made it tricky for people.
You know how much he hates Evan. Yeah. The only person who hates Evan Ingram more than B League is Hamid Sandhu, and we know that. So, was that Kenny Galladay? I don't know, but it was somebody on the. He pretty much hates everyone.
He doesn't like Galladay. That's true.
Yeah, he hates everyone on the Giants.
Yeah, which is fair. That's not the opposite of the the Packers and 49ers offense back then. Not the offense you necessarily want to invest a ton of pieces in.
Definitely not.
Although just talking about injuries, knowing Barkley's been bad for the last couple of years, this seems like this would be a good year to actually buy Barkley at. It seemed like earlier in the offseason was a discount price. Now he's kind of gone back to where he was, but
even creeping back up there at the end of the first, beginning of the second. I mean, he was like. There were times where he was available in like the mid third, like a couple of months ago, which was just ridiculous.
I did get him in the third recently, but it is a super flex league. So knowing that, that probably is still equivalent to maybe a second round pick. But yeah. And go Barkley's probably the only guy we want on the Giants. You can ignore everyone else. Ignore the bad teams, right? That's almost maybe a revelation for some people. And the next question is there a revelation that you got that you kind of wished you had earlier in your life?
Yeah, this is a really deep question. I had to think about this one, and I came up with something. So, and this is a safe space, so it's like we're going deep. I'm a private guy, but we're going deep here. I have definitely spent a lot of time in my life wanting to change things that happened to me. Things that happened in the past, things that I would have wanted to be different, maybe, and getting upset, frustrated, blaming myself, shaming myself, and using up a lot of energy, and really wanting to be perfect, cut out parts of myself that I didn't like, parts of my past that I didn't like, and just wanting it to be perfect. And I'm a big fan of Brené Brown, the researcher and author, and she has a quote: "When we deny our stories, they define us. When we own our stories, we get to write the ending." And I really resonated with that and really appreciated that. And in the last few years, I've kind of come to terms with like just accepting things a lot easier and not kind of railing against like things that might have happened or things that I wish would have been different, and being more present focused. And it's really helped me a lot. So that's something that I definitely use a lot of energy on for a really long time in my life. And if I could, have done anything differently or wish I knew that earlier, that would be something that I wish I knew or had that revelation earlier in my life.
We can't change the past, but we can change the future.
Yeah. And all we have is the present, really. It's like all we have is the here and now. And that's how I play fantasy football. It's like, what do I always say? It's like this week and next week. It's like, oh, what's it going to be 3 years from now? It's like, I'm not really that concerned about that. It's like, I got to get through this week. I got to fill the lineup for this week. And I'd like to fill the lineup for next week. So what do I got to do to fill the lineup for this week and then next week? And that's really where my focus is. And then next week, I'll think about that week and the week after that. And you just keep going. And then hopefully you win the last game of the season and you get to hoist the trophy and win the title and all that. But that's the way that I play, regardless if it's redraft, dynasty, this week and next week. How do I make the best lineups? And that's it.
Well, speaking of dynasty 2-year intervals, like 2 years ago, would you have been able to transition so nicely to the next topic, which is a bunch of fantasy questions, including your thoughts, Doc, on zero RB?
So I have a question for you. So if we're talking zero RB, when do I get to take my first running back?
And I suppose that's part of the question, right? The zero RB strategy doesn't necessarily define a certain round. It's more about certain value pockets. Other terms have come up like the RB dead zone, which I know actually B League is not maybe so impressed of that name, but it kind of feels like those two topics are used in correlation. Like you'd start your taking your zero RB guys either in the dead zone or after it. And seems like the dead zone last year was 5th, 6th round. Maybe this year it even moves up to the 4th round. So it can be as early, say, as the 4th round is. Some people might still define that as zero RB. Maybe that gets too close to the hero RB of one. But the truth is, it doesn't seem like there's I've 28 episodes. I think outside of the Letterkenny episode of their SFB division, that was kind of just a strange one. But we'll say 26 episodes up to this point of asking this question. No one really gave a definitive answer. This is the exact round.
All right. Well, you know what? Let's be trailblazers. I'm going to give a definitive answer. It depends on you. I'm just kidding. I like it in some cases. I really do. And I've done it in the past and it has worked. I think one of the things that it does do, and you need to be prepared for, is it puts a lot of pressure on you to make up that production. Like we talked about many times on the show. And I even wrote about in the article of how to get like that running back production later on without having to spend the capital and doing it later. It puts a lot of pressure on you to kind of need to hit on those things. Otherwise, you're going to have big holes in your lineup potentially. And the more you push it, the more pressure you're putting on yourself. So one of the things that I understand is that feeling of pressure and anxiety of like looking at your team after 5, 6, 7 rounds, like I don't have a running back, like the anxiety that builds there. And it's like, oh, this doesn't feel good. I get that. The one thing that I will say is that like mining for gold on the waiver wire and trying to find these running backs, later, like I really like that. Like playing fantasy baseball, like the guy that's the equivalent, the player that's the equivalent of running back is like the closer. It's like you can take a closer early and feel more secure, or it's very much opportunity based. Like a guy gets a job as a closer, he gets saves. It's based on opportunity. So you can find a lot of those guys on waivers, but there's this pressure to do it. And some people really don't like that. It brings up a lot of anxiety for them and they really hate it. I love it. Like I love finding these guys on waivers. I love digging through and panning for gold and trying to find these guys, later in the draft and on waivers. So knowing that and knowing that that's something that I'm good at and that I enjoy, I think sometimes it's really suited me. And, I've done zero RB and it's worked. Contextually, there are the other parts of what are the ADPs like, what kind of players are available in the dead zone, after the dead zone, where are players typically going, and then your format. So I realized that, and you had another episode where you talked about league settings and league format and how you really need to know that. What I found is that I was playing in leagues where you had to start 3 wide receivers, or in some cases you could start up to 4 or 5. And I was doing kind of like either a zero RB or, what they call now hero RB, where you take one running back and then kind of forget about the position for rounds and rounds and rounds. And I was doing really well because I was having these really good wide receiver core and, good tight ends and good quarterbacks. And then I would find these guys later. I'd pick up a couple of guys that hit, and it's like, okay, now you really got something. You got a powerhouse team. And I really like that. What I found is that I was in other leagues where you only had to start 2 wide receivers, and you could start up to 4 running backs or 5 or whatever. And when I tried to employ like a 0 RB strategy there, I was getting my butt kicked. And just the difference of those different leagues and what your starting requirements are, what the player pool looks like, makes a big difference. So all that being said, the short answer is I do like it in some cases. I have used it. It does work. I don't hate it. But the one that I really favor now is I think I've been converted. I'm kind of a hero RB guy now. It's like, find that guy early on that you really think can just blow the doors off of the league and really maybe finish in the top 3 overall, that you can get maybe in the 2nd or 3rd round, and then focus on the other positions, and then go back and, look for those RB3 or 4 guys that can ascend to RB2, or in some cases even RB1 production. And that's how I try to build teams, and it's been pretty successful.
I think this question would count as a 0 RB. Like if you went, 5 rounds, maybe 6 rounds without taking a running back, and then Chase Edmonds as your RB1. Is that a player you're comfortable with specifically as your RB1 in a 0 RB build?
I don't know about comfortable with Chase Edmonds specifically. Like, there would be other guys that I would be comfortable with. But I think it could work. It's just that you have to, I would be comfortable if I had, like, let's say Chase Edmonds, Devin Singletary, Tony Pollard, Alexander Madison, JD McKissick, Naeem Hines. Like, it depends on the rest of the running back stable, where it's like, okay, how am I going to Frankenstein's monster my way to running back production out of this group? Rashad Penny, like, I don't need them to be great. I don't need them to ascend into the stratosphere. I just need them to get me some kind of production while I figure it out, and while guys are playing and we know guys are going to get hurt. And can I take advantage of that? And can I keep adding to the stable and realizing there's going to be a lot of burn, a lot of churn, and it's going to be work. It's not going to be plug and play, throw your studs in there, and they're just going to go crush it and get you 25 points a week. It's like, you're going to have to mine and work and make trades and do waiver pickups and fab and all that good stuff. But again, I like that kind of stuff. And I like finding those guys, even just for a couple of weeks. Ernest Johnson, Khalil Herbert, Elijah Mitchell, like from last year. Those guys that you just find them. Nobody drafted them. They're kind of like the island of misfit toys, or they're overlooked. And then you put them in and you get some really good production. And now you really got something. So that's kind of the way that I approach it. And it definitely puts a lot of pressure on you as a fantasy football player. It's not the easy road, but it's the road less traveled. But it definitely can reap some really big benefits. So that's kind of my take on it.
I'd imagine if you're going 0 RB, any player you're taking as the RB1, you're not going to feel comfortable as an RB1. But the beauty of it is, the one individual running back won't be the impact. The best impact is felt is that you cast a wide net. And so if you're going with 0 RB, especially if it's a 1 quarterback league, and you decide I want to get an elite quarterback and elite tight end, you may not even draft backups, and those roster spots are going to hold for backup running backs. If you're going 0 RB, you probably want more than half of your roster to be running backs, because you want as many chances. Because what you're going to essentially do is you've got to fill your 2 running back spots every week, and you're just going to focus on and like you said, Doc, short term, who do I have to fill in that running back spot this particular week? And so, you give yourself a wide net of players, figure out each week who's the most likely to get those opportunities, and the more players you have, the more players you can choose from. So if you're going to go with, okay, I'm going to fill with 5 elite wide receivers and, get that elite tight end quarterback, I'm going to draft, say, something like this, where you're drafting a running back in the 6th round. You're going to have, probably 4 really good receivers there, and then maybe draft another 4 throughout the draft. But then everything else from that point on will just be running backs or the occasional receiver if they fall in value. But you're going to, I think the beauty of the 0 RB is the back end. You just need to have volume of running backs, which even in a robust RB, you still do that anyway. I mean, you'll push maybe it more forward, but you'll still kind of fill out with some of those running backs anyway.
You know, the other thing that's important is when the season starts versus when you draft, because there's a
True.
lot. How much time do you have between when you're done drafting and like how many preseason games are there before the season starts and practices and things like that? Because you've already seen some guys, they get hurt, in practice, they get hurt in the games, and the more time you have between when the season starts and when you've actually drafted, the more I would skew towards like taking more shots at those kind of like ambiguous backfields, those guys that are one injury away type of thing, and trying to hold as many spots on my roster for that, because those are the things like Darrell Henderson last year. Like Darrell Henderson was a throwaway until Cam Akers, ruptured his Achilles. And then all of a sudden you have an RB2 basically, with like borderline RB1 upside on some weeks. And that comes out of nowhere. And that happens not infrequently. So those are that's the other thing to take into account. It's like contextually, like how much time do I have to kind of figure this stuff out? And I look at like starting running backs, like when you have that long time period, it's almost like a ticking time bomb. It's like you have these guys and it's like you just want to like wrap them in bubble wrap and like put them on a shelf until the beginning of September. And when that doesn't happen and they get hurt, like that's the worst. Like, the Cam Akers thing, or, other guys that like they get hurt, like Travis Etienne.
Well,
Like
Dobbins last year, I remember being in a
Dobbins,
draft. We did a
yeah,
live draft, and then probably the draft wasn't even done, and Dobbins in that day, preseason game got the knee injury. So we're getting
exactly.
alerts. I'm pretty sure people were checking the phone, getting the alerts while the draft
Yeah,
was still going. So this dude drafted. I mean, I guess he had that advantage. Okay, well, I could use a few rounds to build the running back depth because I already know one guy's already gotten
yeah,
hurt. We haven't even finished the
yeah.
draft.
That's the worst. So it's like whatever you can do to avoid that, and on the other side of it, take advantage of it by having these kind of backup guys, or the lesser thought of guys who can ascend to really good running back production, at least for part of the season. And then you kind of figure it out as you go. Because football, unfortunately, fantasy football is a war of attrition. It's like the healthiest team, I think, a lot of times has a better chance to win at the end of the year when it really counts.
And you can make your team healthier by continuously adding players, and the injured players coming in and out. So you kind of have to, as a manager, to also manage your team through the season and through those injuries, and that makes the beauty of the waiver wire pickups, of course. And so earlier you spoke about the importance of knowing your format and league settings. But
Yes.
curious, what is your preferred league format in fantasy football?
So I already mentioned it. I won't go too deep into detail, but I like start three wide receivers, like forced to start three wide receivers. And
Okay.
I think that just personal preference, it plays to one of my strengths, picking up the kind of lesser known running backs and things like that. But it puts more pressure on people to have to do that. And when I go kind of hero RB and kind of get those elite wide receivers, I'm able to get a positional advantage off of that.
Now, I guess I suppose that is taken count as a roster setting, but is there one setting that like you would want to kind of maybe, I guess, augment just like those roster settings, like any settings on the side of that you feel like are must haves in leagues?
Yeah. Some sort of point perception, full
And
point, half
it's funny because
point.
that's what I was thinking. Well, we want to put the importance of wide receivers up the
Yeah.
points per reception. So yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
That, and it also helps with kind of these later round running backs that kind of tend to be forgotten. Naeem Hines, JD McKissick, even like, the one of the demigods of this kind of like PPR running back, like James White, the recently retired James White, who was just amazing, who was always undervalued and always like had the ability to like be that in case of emergency break glass, throw this guy in and he can get you 15 or 20 points, and he's forgotten about, he's just on waivers. Just because he's quote unquote just a pass catcher.
Well, I guess we'll get to the players that I don't think any of them would just be viewed as just a pass catcher. I mean, I guess we'll talk.
I used
Again,
it for those of you not watching. I used air quotes when I said just a pass catcher. I mean, he was amazing, but
yeah, no, for
but
sure.
air
But
quotes.
we're getting to the real amazing players here. So, Doc, your all-time fantasy QB1, RB1, wide receiver one, and tight end one.
Okay, so I really like this one. I put a little twist on it. I try to do it a little bit differently, at least for most of them. So we'll start with tight end. So I really struggle with this because I was like Rob Gronkowski versus Antonio Gates, and I'm like, which way do I go with this? And I think ultimately I went with Antonio Gates as far as being the GOAT. And the reason for that is he was the originator when there were no other tight ends that could really like match his production. Now there's Kelsey, there's Kittle, there's Waller, there's Andrews, and, there's these other guys that are available later that could be top 3 or top 5 tight ends. Like Gates was the guy, and he was the guy that really where I learned about positional advantages. And there were years where I drafted Antonio Gates in the 2nd round, which was like kind of unheard of. Like he was like 3rd, 4th, 5th round. Like, what are you doing? And he still paid off at a 2nd round price, which seemed ridiculous. And it was just like these guys, when they blow up, like they really give you a ridiculous advantage. And that was kind of my education on that. And that was Antonio Gates. And he just hung around forever. And he was in an episode of The League. I don't know if you ever watched that show on I think it was on FX. And one of the guys, it's about these guys that have a fantasy football league and they talk trash to each other and whatever. And they went to a spa and the one guy runs into Antonio Gates in the hot tub. And he's just like, Antonio Gates, he's like, dude, I'm so mad at you. He's like, you killed my team. You dropped a 40 burger on me. And I was like, that's what Antonio Gates used to do at the tight end position. Like he would legit drop 30 or 40 points on you as a tight end and just eradicate, your opponent. And I was like, he's the GOAT.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was funny you mentioned taking tight end the 2nd round, and that's kind of regular. We saw that with Gronk and Jimmy Graham. But I guess even like through Gronk's heyday, he always had another, like if you pick the other tight end right that could match him, like most years you were good, but you kind of made it sound like Gates was the only one that was producing like that. And like, a few years where there was no one else matching. So you either had him or you didn't.
Yeah. And Graham is a great call out too. I thought about him too. Like I had him on a few teams and he was amazing. He was just amazing.
All right. So so whatever next position you want.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we're going. Wide receiver, I got to go with Calvin Johnson, Megatron. And the reason for that is that he was the only player that I can think of that in my home league, the one that I really cared the most about, he was on 3 consecutive championship teams. It was basically like you draft Calvin Johnson, you win the league. Like that was how amazing he was.
Sorry, from you or just like the league winner?
Just whoever. Yeah, it wasn't me, unfortunately. Like I love.
I was gonna say 3 straight champs. Congrats, dog. But yeah.
Yeah, it was just like if you had Calvin Johnson on your team for 3 years, like that team won the league some way, some shape, somehow. And I was like, that is amazing. And then me personally, like I've had him on teams in other leagues. And he was basically like, I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who was, we were watching the game and he was going up against Megatron and he was up by like 38 or something like that. And Calvin Johnson did what Calvin Johnson used to do. He dropped like a 48 on him or something like that. And he was like all despondent and he comes back to the table and he's like, oh, do you believe like I went up against Megatron, I was up by 38 and I ended up losing by 10. And the rest of the people at the table, we all kind of looked around and we were like, yeah, like that's what Megatron does. Like no lead is safe against Megatron. Like, yeah, you lost. Like everybody else here has too. Get used to it. That's what he does.
All right. Running backs next. Or are we saving that for last? Are we going to go 0 RB and save it for the end?
No, we were going to go, hey, you know what? We will. You see, you're the host. You're making the rules. For quarterback, I'm going to go maybe a little bit more obscure. I like to think in terms of like guys that help me personally, like win a fantasy championship. And that would be Cam Newton in his 2015 MVP year. I will always have a soft spot for Cam Newton because we ended up taking him in the double-digit rounds as our second quarterback. And I think in one league, my actual starter was Kevin Cobb from the Eagles. And then I drafted Cam Newton as a backup. And Cam Newton ended up having like a 45 TD season and was just running, passing, was ridiculous, was the MVP, and dragged that team to a championship. So 2015, Cam Newton is the MVP. That's my guy at quarterback. And then for running back, I think Ryan Searfoss is going to appreciate this one. So LaRon McLean in 2008, he is my RB1 because he perfectly typifies exactly what we've been talking about for half an hour. Like I picked this guy up off the scrap heap and started him in a final, and he had like 160 something or 180 yards or something like that, including an 82-yard touchdown run against the Cowboys. And I won my league because I started LaRon McLean. And then I was like, was like, this is viable. Like you could pick up these guys that no one's ever heard of, and they have a good game at the right time. And he wasn't really good before then. He wasn't really good after that. But for that moment in time, he was my guy, and he got me a title. And he'll always have a place in my heart for that.
Oh, well, I mean, here we are. We're an hour and 5 minutes in, and we're going to get to our final section. So an hour and 5, we are at the high five section. So
right.
top 5 of 5 different categories. So Doc, start us off. You're dancing rhythm. There's clearly music going on in your head.
Yeah.
Actually, can I hear it out loud? No. What's that music that's always playing in your head? You can't, songs you can't get rid of, or you're always thinking. Who are your top 5 favorite artists or bands?
Okay. I had a lot of fun with this one. I'm not a huge music person. Like a lot of the people that you've had on, they're really into music. I know you're into music, and there was some really like in-depth and interesting conversations. And I was like, man, I'm not going to be able to hang with that. So I was like, I'll just, do my thing. So first one, Bruce Springsteen. Like I'm a very proud New Jersey resident. I was born in New Jersey. I live in New Jersey. I've been in New Jersey most of my life. So I love all of Bruce Springsteen's songs. He's very quintessential New Jersey for me. And a really funny story is the song Born to Run. I remember this is years ago when I was a kid. They actually wanted to make that the state song of New Jersey. There was like a push to make that the state song, which I don't think anybody really listened to the lyrics of that song that wanted to make it the state song. Because there's a line in there, or a couple of lines where it says, baby, this town rips the bones from your back. It's a death trap. It's a suicide rap. We got to get out while we're young. And I'm like, that's not exactly going to like help tourism. So,
well, but from what I understand about New Jersey, doesn't that capture New Jersey spirit?
Yeah,
where
unfortunately, it does in some ways. So I was like, this is not what we want to promote. Like we want to promote the other stuff, the really good stuff about New Jersey. And this is probably not it. And it's a great song. And Robert Wall did a bit about that like years and years ago about how funny that was. So I always thought that was great. But I love Bruce Springsteen. I love Born to Run. So that's one.
And just to say, I feel like Born in the USA is another one that kind of like people don't necessarily listen to all the lyrics. They listen to the chorus and stuff. But I think it's so many people just love listening to Springsteen. Just the song melody sense and great songwriting. So even if people aren't listening to the whole lyrics, the songs still capture an essence that people just love. So listen better, folks, but you can still tell that people are clearly listening for a reason.
For sure. And that's a really, really good way of kind of capturing it. Like he definitely has an impact and a really unique voice. Another really impactful and unique, voice, Elvis Presley, believe it or not. So he died right after I was born. Like,
believe it or not, no one's actually mentioned Elvis. So
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because he's kind of forgotten about. And the thing is, he died right after I was born. He died in 1977. I was born in 1976. And he's really an amazing, underappreciated talent. And the thing is, it's like he's kind of been caricaturized as like, when he was like fat and out of shape and towards the end of his career. But I mean, he was amazing. And, all of his songs, for 20 years, like he really kind of reinvented himself a few times. One of the things that I really like, one of his songs, A Little Less Conversation. And the line in there, a little less conversation, a little more action. And that makes me think of like when I was growing up in Bayonne. And, people would talk a lot. They would talk a lot when we were playing football or playing sports or just in general. And they would talk trash. And back then and even now, it's like I always just think about it. It's like, you know what, like a little less conversation, like a little more action. Like, don't tell me what you're going to do. Like, show me what you're going to do, because I'm going to show you what I can do. So I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm just going to do it. So, you want to talk about it or you want to do it. And I just really, I love that. And that's kind of like part of the New Jersey in me. It's like, yeah, let's not talk anymore. Like, are we going to do something or are we not going to do something? So you really love that. And now we're going to go deep tracks. So you're going to go deep cuts. So the thing is that I really am moved by lyrics. So music is great, like the sound of music and beats and things like that. But the thing that really impacts me is lyrically, like hearing phrases or hearing lyrics and songs, and they kind of stick with me. So there's a group called Static X, which is a thrash metal group. And unfortunately, the lead singer really sad story. He killed himself. And then subsequently a year later, his wife, was grieving and she committed suicide as well. So really kind of tragic. But there's a song that they do called Push It. And it's just something where it's like a really strong guitar riff, and I listen to it if I'm doing some kind of physical activity like running or working out or something like that. And I remember it was on my playlist for like a run, and I was doing like a 15K, and I'm not really a great long distance runner, and I was struggling. And that song kicked on, and it was like, push it physically, like find a way to push yourself. And that's something that really resonates with me. It's like finding ways to push yourself physically, but then the opposite of, kind of the way I approach things is not pushing yourself emotionally, or, like pushing your body with work, or not being present focused. So it's like finding new ways to kind of transcend like physical barriers, but like taking time for yourself, and not pushing yourself past the barrier when it comes to work and work-life balance and things like that.
Very good. I mean, yeah. So clearly, like, you talk about the importance of lyrics. Like all three of the artists you've mentioned, you've tied to lyrics somehow almost immediately. So clearly, like the words mentioned. And Jamie loves Static X. So saw them in Cleveland like 15, 20 years ago.
Amazing. I saw them live too. One of the few bands I've actually gotten to see live, and it was an amazing show. So it's good that somebody else like knows who they are. This one is not going to get me any points with anyone, but just bear with me. There is a method behind the madness. So Limp Bizkit, there's a song called Break Stuff. And to understand, like, we've talked about like being a doctor and things like that and how stressful it can be. I actually had an alarm clock during my intern year, which is my first year after medical school, where I was like getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and seeing a bunch of patients, a lot of pressure, a lot of long hours, a lot of stress. And I made that my wake up song. And it's like I woke up to that song every day, and it just seemed like, it fit. And really kind of, I look back on it now, and it's almost kind of sad because it speaks to my frame of mind at the time, but I didn't realize it because I was kind of in the eye of the hurricane of all this stress and all this pressure, and just not feeling good about like my daily work, and fear and anxiety and all these things that, like, when everybody's like, hey, you're a doctor, that's great. And it's like, yeah, it's great now. But when I was an intern and I was working 80 to 100 hours and I was stressed and whatever, it wasn't so great. And so one of the first lines is, it's just one of those days when you don't want to wake up. Everything is effed. Everybody sucks. You don't really know why, but you want to justify ripping someone's head off. And I was like, that was my state of mind at the time. And that seemed normal. And I remember that now, and try to stay positive and not go back to that place, because it wasn't a good place. And I know that there are a lot of other people in the medical field that maybe they can identify with that it's really challenging and it's really hard. And, things with the pandemic and things made it even worse. And it's like, I still remember that was 2007. And I still remember waking up to that song. And every time I hear the opening guitar riff to that song, I get taken back to intern year. And I think about where I am now and just how grateful I am that, that things have changed, and there's a lot more positivity in my life.
Any other artists you want to mention?
And then the last one, this is long, but the other ones won't be as long. This, I don't know. I want to give people the deep cuts. I guarantee no one's ever listed this one before. I don't think. So there's a duet called Nico and Vince, and there's a song called Am I Wrong? And this I love for people that just life, content creation. I think it's really applicable. And I still listen to it and I think about like these lyrics. And the lyrics are, am I wrong for thinking out of the box from where I stay? Am I wrong for saying that I'll choose another way? Am I wrong for trying to reach the things I can't see? Fight for yours and don't let go. Don't let them compare you. No, don't worry. You're not alone. That's just how we feel. I mean, I love that. And that right there, like, that sums it all up. It's like, be unique, be yourself, be authentic, have integrity, and you're not alone.
So before we continue on the high fives, Jay does have a question. What advice would you give to your 2007 self? But I do wonder if this ties into the revelation you're talking about, just like always being present and not, not dwelling on the negativity you can't control. Certainly the things that happen in the past you can't control. So I don't know if that would tie into this, but feel free.
There you go. You nailed it. Like that would be it. Like they just go back and I guess we were at like the half-hour mark. Go back and listen to the what revelation did I wish I had. Yeah, it would be like it's just be yourself. Get through it, and don't be so hard on yourself. Like you're doing okay. You're all right.
Yeah, for sure. If you got to a certain point, even if you're struggling, you've gotten to that point already. So you've done something, even if it seems insignificant. Like all the little moves we make every day to improve, we don't necessarily recognize them as well because we're, like you were saying, you're in that kind of the cyclone of it. You're in the sauce of it every day, so you don't really see your day-to-day changes and your day-to-day improvements. But they are there. So
they are there. Yeah. Yes, I love that.
Yes, we'll get to the next high five category. So top 5 books.
Okay. So first one, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, the book. Yeah, no. Well, modesty forbids. I am very proud of that book, but I will we'll go with other books that I haven't written. So Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. I saw the movie, I love the movie, but I read the book and it was like he's got a very unique writing style. It's very eclectic, somewhat of an acquired taste, but I just like the book went into so much more detail and into his state of mind that the movie couldn't really capture. And he's a very unique individual, but it was an amazing book. The next one is a book by the author Clive Cussler called Sahara, which they also made a movie about. I think Matthew McConaughey was in it. I can't remember. The movie wasn't that great, but the book was really good. And it's about Abraham Lincoln and what if he didn't really get assassinated and he ended up like and they found his skeleton in the Sahara Desert and what was that all about? And that's kind of how the story unfolds. And I, used to really be into history and time travel and things like that. And kind of got transported back there and conspiracies and all that stuff. And it was my brother-in-law actually gave it to me when I was like 17 and I didn't really read books back then. And I read that and I inhaled it and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So I really like that. The next one is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, which they also made it to a movie. The movie was really good. The book's even better. And that book is about like 80s pop culture and all this stuff that like I was a kid, but I was alive for a lot of that stuff and really enjoyed it. And kind of the idea of how like over time, like what was old becomes new again. And it's like, I guess I've been around long enough where things are starting to come back and, things that I remember from a kid are like cool again. Like now people have like retro Nintendo entertainment systems where it's like they have like all the Nintendo games like on their computer. And it's like, yeah, that's what I played when I was growing up.
People are almost embracing that. This doesn't work as well as all this other stuff. It's so cool and retro. Whereas back there, we're like, oh, we just wish this would work better.
It wasn't retro. It was like, this is it. This is what we got. So yeah. Ready Player One. Number 4, Winning Fantasy Baseball by Larry Schechter, which helped me not just in baseball, but also all fantasy sports with regard to kind of changing my ideas about player valuation and auction strategy. So really useful. I use it for what I learned from that. I use it for fantasy baseball. I use it for fantasy football. I use it all the time. I refer to it every year before my fantasy baseball draft. So I love it. And then the last one is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, which is an older book. And it's a book about where they do an experiment on a mouse and he gets like super intelligence and they decide to try it on a person and he also gets super intelligence. But then over time, like it starts to fade and he ends up going back to kind of where he was. And I think the lesson from that I just really, really like the story. And it's like change and growth is possible, but nothing's forever. So really like enjoy what you have, like where you are and, grow where you're planted, all that stuff that they write Hallmark cards about and embroider on pillows. They do it for a reason. And it's being present focused and being happy where you are and really trying to do the best that you can where you are and striving for more, but trying to be happy and accepting of where you are and going from there, I think is the lesson.
Well, a lot of your books end up being movies, so I don't know if the list will be the same. Well, actually, you mentioned for one, it definitely won't. But what are your top 5 favorite movies?
Okay, so we're gonna go in reverse, and some of these are gonna be a little different. I really struggled with one of them because it was like A Quiet Place. I love that movie. Escape from New York with Kurt Russell, but the one I landed on was Predator with Arnold. I watched that with my dad growing up, and I'm not big into scary movies at all, but there are so many great characters there in that movie. You have Arnold in his heyday, Carl Weathers, Bill Duke, who else? Jesse the Body. I don't have time to bleed. I mean, it's fantastic. And just the idea of like there's this monster out there that's hunting them for sport and they're trying to kill it. And then they figure out a way to do it. But there's so many great one-liners from that movie. I still use them today. And like when I use it, drop it into like a regular conversation and somebody picks up on it, like it's always a good feeling. So and the nostalgia factor, because I watched that movie probably 10 times with my dad. It would be on like HBO or Cinemax and it would come on and we would just watch it. And it was great.
It's funny because my friend Dylan is a huge fan of that movie and he watches it a ton as well. He loves the whole Predator series, all the Alien series as well. So
next one, another baseball movie, Major League, the original with Charlie Sheen and Corbin Burnson and Tom Berenger. Just love that movie. And as a Yankees fan, that was back in a time where the Yankees were terrible. And it's about the Cleveland Indians and how they kind of go from like worst to first and things like that. And there's a lot of like fun, real kind of baseball action type stuff in there. But that really gave me hope that like someday the Yankees, now mind you, this is like 1989, 1990, that's, you know, saying like, hopefully someday the Yankees will be good. And it's like, yeah, we got there. It's like, we know the Yankees are great. Like, what are you talking about? But back then, they were brutal. So I was like, what would it be like to like root for a baseball? And I was a big Yankees fan and they were really awful. They were like the worst team in the majors, worst team in the American League. And I was like, what would it be like if the Yankees could like, you know, just win the American League East, forget about like winning the World Series. And then, you know, a few years later, they started to get really good. And then, you know, they were an amazing dynasty. So that was great to be on that ride. But I love that movie. And I probably have seen it like 20 times and I would watch it again. Next one's Old School, with Jeremy Piven and Luke Wilson, Vince Vaughn. Amazing movie, and Will Ferrell, of course. And the scene where where Will Ferrell's character shoots himself in the neck with the tranquilizer dart. I was watching that movie on a plane going to like Las Vegas or something like that. And when I never seen the movie before. And when that scene happened, I like lost time. I was laughing so hard that it's like, I felt like I woke up like 15 minutes later, like out of a trance. Cause it was just like, I was just done. And it's still, there's so many like amazingly funny things about that movie. I love it. I can't get away from it. Another Jeremy Piven movie, number 2, very underrated movie. It's an older movie, but PCU. So it's like Jeremy Piven's character. He's like been in college for like 5 or 6 years. And it's almost like a reboot of like Animal House. But there are, again, so many great one-liners in that movie. It's so underrated. It's really, really funny. And it's like, I ended up like before we got married, but my wife and I were talking about movies and she was like, hey, have you ever seen PCU? I'm like, oh my God, don't tell me like you like PCU. And we actually like sat down and watched PCU together and we're dying laughing. And it was like this tremendous bonding experience. And we watched it together like 2 or 3 times, like in the time we've been together. Like it's just one of our favorites. So definitely love that one.
So I don't know if this is PCU, if this counts. Maybe this happens to college, right? But I think Jamie's asking, is that the movie where Will Ferrell runs through the street naked?
That's Old School, where he runs through the streets naked, which is pretty great. Come on, everybody, we're going streaking down to the quad, and he just takes off, and he's naked, and everybody else.
There's a Will Ferrell impersonation. Thanks, Doc.
Whatever.
He's not from New Jersey, right?
So don't judge me. Don't judge me on that one. And then the last one, I saved the best for last. And I don't know how many people are really into this one, but Aliens with Sigourney Weaver, the Ridley Scott movie. I've seen that movie probably 50 times and would easily watch it again tonight. I love that movie. I love the action. I love how absolutely scary and terrifying the aliens are. It's like they're like this unbeatable machine of just horror. It's like they have acid for blood. They like inject aliens into you and they come out of your chest. It's so creepy and so scary. And you have like this dichotomy of like the Space Marines, who are all these badasses. And then you have Sigourney Weaver, who is like the heroine, and she ends up being just as big of a badass as everybody else. And is able to kind of like, based on her experience, like lead them through this thing and get some of them out alive anyway. But my favorite part about it is there's the character, the little girl who was part of the original colony, who all get killed, and she's the only one who survives, and she gets taken away and kidnapped by the alien, and Sigourney Weaver goes back and gets her, and it's like, I'm not leaving her behind. Like I'm not going to be able to get out of here. Like I can't live with that. Like either we're leaving together or I'm not leaving. And I really resonated with that. And the last part is, if you go from Alien to Aliens, Alien the first one to Aliens, and you play the whole thing out, the only character that survives the whole thing when it's all said and done is the cat. Because the cat is quick enough to get away from the alien on the first one and smart enough to stay home when they go back for the second expedition in the second one. So the cat survives. So I was happy about that. I'm a big animal person, so I'm glad that the cat made it.
There we go, and that's the lesson. 9 lives, right? So it'll always survive.
9 lives, and made it through. Made it survive the alien.
So he could survive 9 movies then.
Yeah, the cat somewhere, I believe, is in that timeline. That cat's still alive. Like that cat is still good.
Run through a field somewhere, happy, chasing a butterfly or something.
Indeed.
Nothing's happier than, I guess that would be a game day food for the cat, would be a butterfly, but for a human, I don't think as a medical doctor you would recommend eating butterflies as a healthy, balanced diet.
I would not.
Okay, good. I at least knew that. Okay. You see, I have been listening. What are your top 5 favorite game day foods?
All right. So first and foremost, we got to go with wings. And I don't care if they're bone-in, boneless, cauliflower, whatever, just some sort of buffalo wings. That's number 1. Number 2, pizza. Number 3, French fries. And, talking about movies, there's a great scene from Men at Work where Emilio Estevez like takes some fries off of like another character's plate, and he grabs his hand and he says, "There's few sacred things in people's lives that you should never mess with, and one of them is another man's fries," and like throws his hand away. So I'm not that militant about it. If you want some of my fries, you can have some on game day, but there's definitely going to be French fries there. Lime Tostitos and salsa. Those things are amazing. And I remember this year for the Super Bowl, they had at the supermarket, they had every other type of tortilla chip that you could possibly want at like 3 different stores where I live, and they did not have Lime Tostitos, and I was like so disappointed. It was like I made do with the regular ones, but the Lime Tostitos with salsa, amazing, like chef's kiss.
I was gonna say, did they all sell out? Is that why? Because everyone else
they must have. I mean, I was like, okay, well, at least my wife and I were like, we're not the only ones that like really like these things, because there was other ones. There's plenty of other tortilla chips, but the lime ones were gone. I mean, it gone. So that was something. And then the last one, we talked about baseball a bunch. Like to me, like baseball game, hot dog. Like if I'm at a baseball game, like I'm eating a hot dog. Like this is happening. There's no way that's not happening. So those are my 5 game day foods.
All right. So final category, and doctor. You are, again, medical doctor, and you've seen, again, radiologist, you've seen a ton of people's bodies, really, like, what's going on inside, bones and everything that's, again, you mentioned the puzzle of trying to figure out what's wrong with someone, how to help someone. So you kind of have a good basis of, athletes and bodies and things like that. But what are your top 5 favorite athletes?
Okay.
Who are? I didn't say what.
Who are.
They are humans.
So the first one's Michael Jordan. Like just right off the bat, let's get that out of the way. Best that I've ever seen. I just remember how he like transcended the game of basketball. Like it seemed like he could do whatever he wanted, and he just found a way to win. And they said he couldn't shoot, and then he got to be a better shooter. And they said that he, the way to beat him was to beat him up and push him around, and he got stronger, and he still could do all these crazy moves. And it's like he just continued to evolve and get better and better and better. So he's the guy for me. Number 2, Babe Ruth. Just an amazing, when you think about like what he did as a pitcher, as a hitter, and just to like contextualize it, like he was hitting more home runs at a time where not a lot of people were hitting home runs. Like he was hitting more home runs than other teams in the league. Like Babe Ruth had like this many home runs. This team had like half as many home runs as him, the whole team. Like that's, I mean, how do you contextualize that in the game today? It would be the equivalent of like if Aaron Judge hit like 700 home runs or something like that. Like it's insane. Bo Jackson, partially because I'm a Raiders fan, but another amazing athlete, the 2-sport component of where he, played running back, and he was just such an amazing talent, like running over Bosworth in the end zone, like running down the tunnel after the 90-yard run on Monday Night Football. And then baseball, the power, his arm strength, like his defense, he was just amazing. And then the injury connection, being the first guy to, at least, I don't know if he's the first guy, but I know that he had surgery and had to have hip replacement and came back and played professional baseball with an artificial hip. Like that's how good this guy, and played well. Like that's how good this guy was. That's how much of an athlete he was. So blown away by that. Dion Sanders, again, another 2-sport athlete, the shutdown, maybe one of the original shutdown corners, and a really, really good baseball player, where I was looking up some of his stats before the show. And there was one year he led the league in triples. He hit 300. He stole like 25 bases or something like that. And it's like, oh, that's pretty good. And then I was like, oh yeah, he did it in like half a season's worth of at-bats, because the rest of the time he was playing football at like a ridiculously high level. So I know he had a quote recently where he said, there should be a different level of the Hall of Fame where him and a few other people should be in it, and everybody else should be in like the lower floor of the Hall of Fame. I was like, wow, that's pretty bold. And then I thought about it some more, and I'm like, he might not be wrong. Like he might have a basis to say that.
Base. Yeah, it's not off base. But if I'm correct, he's the only person who's ever played in a Super Bowl and a World Series.
I think you're right. About that. And yeah,
that seems like there should be a sports Hall of Fame, and like that's where like guys like Bo Jackson and Dion Sanders are like first enshrinees. Like that's the recognition of multi sports like that. And you see some Olympic athletes that are like that too. I think of Claire Hughes in Canada, just like great in both winter and summer Olympics. I'm pretty sure she's the only person to medal at both. So you see some great athletes that are like that. Yeah. And then it's funny because I was thinking, you mentioned Michael Jordan, you mentioned Bo Jackson, you can mention Wayne Gretzky here, the Pro Stars cartoon.
Yeah, I did watch that. I think that was on Saturday morning. Like I was really young, but I definitely watched a lot of Saturday morning cartoons. And I definitely remember seeing that with the Pro Star show. I was a connoisseur of Saturday morning cartoons when I was a kid, so I've seen a lot of them.
Were there any other athletes? Did we mention all 5, or
I got one more, and his jersey is hanging behind me right there.
24. Is that Nick Chubb?
Yeah, Nick Chubb. It's going to be a surprise to some people, and here's the reason. It's Marshawn Lynch, beast mode. And the reason isn't not so much for his athletic prowess, although he was a great athlete. To me, it was the way that he stayed true to himself and he handled the media, because he's a very private person, and the media at times you could tell that they were pushing his boundaries and they were being really intrusive. And kind of the way that he did it was there were times where he would answer yes to every question or answer no to every question, or he would just say, I'm just about that action, boss, whenever they asked him a question. I'm just here so I don't get fined. And then there was another one that I really liked where he would just say, thanks for asking. So if they, whatever question they asked, he would just say, thanks for asking me that. I mean, and he did it with a smile on his face. And you could tell that like the media, they were kind of getting riled by it because they weren't getting their answers. And I get it, but he did it in a way that was true to himself. And he wasn't bothered by it. He just found a way to be authentic in that moment and be himself. And I've seen other athletes try to mimic that, and they just can't pull it off. Like the contempt that they have and the anger and the frustration, it comes through and it just doesn't work. It's like he did it in such a way that they didn't even really, they couldn't even really get mad at him for doing it. It was just Marshawn being Marshawn, but he kind of held his boundaries.
If I gotta be here, I'm gonna have some fun. That's what
Yeah,
it
I'm
seems
gonna
like.
have some fun with
He
it.
would kind of. It goes back to your advice, right? The mindset you're in, and like try to. You can't. I have to be here as part of my contract. I have to do these media things. I can be miserable while I'm there, or I can decide to just mess with them, and then maybe they. I think part of it is if I do this enough, they'll just say don't come back. But I think the
Yeah.
problem with that is, and again, I hear sometimes this with media. You hear that with like Belichick and Popovich, like how it's disrespectful to the journalists. But the truth is, like those are the clips that get played over and over again and gives like those journalists that exposure. If you get that one-on-one interview and all they're doing is saying yes or no, like sometimes that's the one that just gets played over and over and gets you exposure into the public knowledge. I always say there's no such thing as bad publicity, so I would tend to lean on that side. I don't see it as disrespect. I see it as it's all part of the same game, and if it's we're not talking about the normal interviews where the player answers everything exactly. We're talking about the Marshawn Lynch's where he's got something clever or funny to say, and it's almost unbelievable. But that's part of what gets the views.
He made it interesting, and other guys that you mentioned like Belichick, Popovich, there Russell Westbrook did it. Like there's been other people, or Richard Sherman tried to like put up a cardboard cutout and ask questions, and it just comes off as like,
I will say Sherman's pretty hilarious with
it was funny. It was
too.
definitely funny, but there was like an underlying feeling of like anger, frustration, and contempt. And like with Marshawn Lynch, I just didn't get that. But they're interesting. So I want to ask you a question. You've asked me so many questions. You've been so generous with your time, and the whole thing with Tom Brady, of like going on vacation with his family, basically, or potentially going on The Masked Singer. We don't know. We'll find out. And I heard a lot of people say it's like, well, why didn't they just tell us? Like there wouldn't have been any questions if he just told us in the beginning of camp. And my thought process to that is, are you outside of your mind? Like if he would have said that in the beginning of camp, there would have been a trillion questions, because that's all people do when these things. Why are you doing that? Where are you going? What's going on here? Like whatever. Like he's like, I'm leaving. It's okay with the team. I'm going to go do what I want to do with my family. I don't have to tell anybody about it. And I'm going to come back when I come back. And that's it. And you guys can guess and speculate and do whatever you want, but I'm not telling you a damn thing. And just the lack of insight of like, well, if he would have just told us in the beginning, there wouldn't have been any questions. It's like, are you kidding me? Like if he would have said that, there would have been a trillion questions. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I do agree with you. Yeah, because then it's like, okay, well now, you're telling your family go on vacation, everyone's going to follow, and then that's just going to be, and then it'll be, oh, how was your vacation? Which those questions will still probably come up now. But you're right. Like it's the media will always talk about the people they want to talk about. So, yeah, don't try don't try and justify your own existence. I suppose, right? I mean, like,
Yes.
why are they questioning why Tom Brady is giving them extra clicks? Don't you want extra clicks and people questioning? Like, isn't that exactly what you want?
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll bring it back to a movie thing, like war games. Like sometimes with the media, the only way to win is not to play the game, right? It's just like, yeah, I'm doing my thing, and I'm not going to talk about it. So I'm not playing the game. And that's what Marshawn did, and that's why I love it.
I am really grateful that you didn't come on here and refuse to answer any question, because as funny as that would have been, maybe, I think also I think people really got to know the real Dr. James Ferretti even better. And yeah, I'm sure that I know I had a blast with this. I hope the same for you, Doc.
Oh, I absolutely did. I mean, this is tremendous. So it definitely felt like a safe space. I hope that people enjoyed it. When you talk about giving something to the audience, I really hope people got something out of it and they enjoyed it. And looking forward to, this season, the Monday night show, the Discord, and just really trying to help people get better at injury analysis and kind of weaving your way through the regular season with football, getting a lot better at it, and hopefully winning some championships. And I really want to be here and make an impact and help people win, like teach people how to get better at injuries so they can win more at fantasy football. That's what I'm all about. And I hope that came through. So thank you again.
Apparently the fun we all had came through too, because JV's mentioning how much of a fun show it was.
Awesome. I'm really glad.
And as you can see on the screen, you can follow the doc on Twitter at TFS Doc. It stands for the Fantasy Sports Doc, if you need help remembering. Also, buy the book. Injuries suck and your fantasy team doesn't have to. And I believe you've got the book linked on your Twitter bio. So if they go to, again, at TFS Doc, they can find it all there.
Yep, it's there. It's on Amazon. There's an e-version. There's a paper copy, and the audio version is in development. So that will be the next thing, and then that'll be that, and then we'll be on to the next thing. But it'll be out there, and then you can ingest it, through audio as well. So
it's funny because I was thinking, oh man, it would have been great if I like linked it into here, and then I realized, I did do that. So if you go actually in the description on the live feed, there is a link down there at the bottom of the description on the YouTube page, and I think that should be for all the Going for Two live pages. So you've got that access to there too. And as Doc mentioned, lots of great shows, and eventually, again, the Monday night time slot will convert into a pregame show starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. Again, our first episode will be the week one first Monday night game, which is September 12th. But of course, between now and then, there's tons of great shows still happening. 2-Point Conversion, the fantasy cheat sheet on Tuesdays. Of course, every Wednesday night, the Armchair Fantasy Show. We have one more episode of the Dynasty Gambit, the show you used to co-host alongside Doc. I guess we didn't mention that before, but yeah, we're mentioning that in now. And I know once the season kicks off, there will be a Going for Two live show every day of the week, and sometimes multiple episodes on days of the week. So I think we're all really excited at the Going for Two family for this upcoming 2022 NFL season.
That's right. It's almost here, right? It's like it's so close. We're almost there. All the drafts are happening. It's really exciting time, and just it's almost here. We're almost there.
Well, and we're almost at the end. So just going to say on behalf of the doc and everyone watching, first off, thank you for that. JB, Jay, any number of Facebook users that comment whose identities will remain secret. But yes, appreciate everyone for watching, listening. Again, on behalf of Dr. James Ferretti, my name is Kyle Senra, on Twitter at Senra Says. And this was the season 2 finale of Press Coverage. Enjoy the rest of the offseason and the NFL season, folks. Bye.